Having languished in production hell for around 13 years, when Paul W.S. came to the Death Race project, there was a lot of uncertainty whether it would capture the spirit of the Roger Corman original Death Race 2000. At the time, the title was still being bounced around, of course, being the highly original Death Race 3000. Now, with Anderson on board, he, in many ways, re-envisioned the project, taking out the original concept, which saw a cross-country race where competitors scored points for running over pedestrians, instead replacing it with a more traditional race course format, with, of course, the added bonus of weapons and a trap-laden course. Anderson, at the same time, choosing to opt for practical effects over CGI, here seems to be in many ways taking many of his moves from the George Miller playbook, as here he brought to the forefront of vicious-looking vehicles and a heavy dose of vehicular carnage to what is probably one of the more underrated efforts on his filmography, perhaps in many ways due to the result of many seeing him as just the director of Resident Evil, and instead choosing to ignore his earlier films such as Shopping and Event Horizon, which had shown him as a more visual director, and in which Death Race certainly is very much a callback to. I'm Elwood.
I'm Kim.
And tonight we're going to be looking at Death Race. Let's take it to the booth. Well, of course, welcome everyone to another exciting edition of Movies and Tea. We welcome you all back to the booth. And we are now here on episode 7. We've now moved on to Death Race, so we're nearing the end of this first season, and I think, I don't want to say it, but I feel that this is sort of like the last hurrah for the good films in the Paul W.S. Anderson filmography, because after this we've obviously got Three Musketeers, and then we've got Pompeii, which I don't think anyone's looking forward to, but enough about that. Let's not focus on the negative here, and we're obviously, let's get back to the positive, because I mean, obviously Death Race is one of my favourites. It's certainly something that excited me when we talked about doing Paul W.S. Anderson as our chosen director for the season 1. I think it was Death Race and Event Horizon were like the two big films that I was like super excited about. Mortal Kombat as well, and it's this sort of excitement that leads you to thinking, yeah, I'll do Paul W.S. Anderson as our first chosen director to reevaluate their filmography. That seems like a great idea. You know, of course, forgetting we got like 6 Resident Evil movies, and obviously we got Pompeii at the arse end of this whole experience. But
which, to be fair, we were about to cut, and then I was like, well, technically we shouldn't, so we might as well just do it.
Yeah.
So if we're all dreading it, it's because of me, and I'm so sorry, because I mean, I have to apologize to myself too, because I have to put myself through it again.
Not enough to watch it once. But obviously we're now up to 2008 in the filmography of Paul W.S. Anderson, and I think at this point he is best known for obviously just that guy who did the Resident Evil movies. It's very hard to sort of detach, and I think with Death Race, much like Alien vs Predator, which we talked about in the last episode, these were the two films which saw him take a break from his Resident Evil sort of workings, and he was still very much attached to as the producer to those films. He was writing the films, but as in his own words, it was sort of like the studios wanted their Death Race movie. They wanted the Alien vs Predator movie, so he was contractually obliged to do them. And it's kind of nice to see that while he was contractually sort of obliged to do these films, he wasn't just going for the motion and actually tried to do something unique and different with those films. I mean, obviously, with Alien vs Predator, we saw him trying to craft out a world that would sort of tie the two franchises together. With Death Race, this was a film that was sort of introduced, and a lot of people were sort of like fans of the Roger Corman original, and were like, oh, it's going to be really naff because it's not people getting run over for sport. You know, it's completely different vision. And I think a lot of people dismissed it rather wrongly at the time because it wasn't going to be just a straight remake. The fact it was going to be, we're going to be having a racetrack format, and obviously at the same time we're going to have heavily armored cars, and it's going to have all these good elements, but people were just like, oh, you're not running people up for like points. That where's the fun in this going to be? But
yeah, but I think that, most people who went in to see Death Race, like, let me assume this, but I'm like, it might be a complete assumption, but I think that most people who went to go see Death Race was solely for Jason Statham. Like, they really, really like Jason Statham, so they would go see this because, there is a certain it's kind of like, I guess the person that pops in my head since I just came back from Montreal Comic Con is that it's kind of like Danny Trejo. They have this kind of like image to them where Jason Statham does this sort of one type of movie and he has this character to him and this kind of like action and badassery in him that everybody really enjoys. So it's kind of like a guaranteed entertainment, just like, I mean, The Rock all has that sort of appeal. And I would say that most of the people who went to see Death Race, myself included, because I didn't know it was directed by Paul W.S. Anderson when I first watched it, like the fact that you either are in this because of the racing element or with Jason Statham, or maybe a combination of both.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I mean, he'd done two of the Transporter movies. So, I mean, at this point, he was sort of establishing himself as sort of like an action hero. Because, I mean, obviously, when he's first sort of introduced, he's doing, like, Guy Ritchie movies. He was doing, like, Lock, Stock. He was doing Snatch. So, I think a lot of people, he was almost like this comedic sort of Cockney fella. And then obviously sort of like Transporter, who saw him as this sort of like real ass kick. And I mean, that really came out of nowhere. I mean, I don't think anyone expected him to be quite the ass kick that he's now obviously seen as. I mean, when he's coming into Death Race, I mean, he's done Crank, he's done, as we say, he's done 2 Transporter, 2 movies, so he's established himself as this action hero. And when he comes to like doing Death Race, I mean, he actually dropped down from 20% body fat to 9% body fat and trained with all the ex-Navy SEAL guys who did a lot of the training for the 300. So he did all the helped to get everyone in shape to play the Spartans. So I know that certainly when we posted the image from Death Race on our Instagram today, it certainly got a lot of likes from people who are clearly fans of Jason Simmons' image in this one, because he is very shredded. I mean, Kim is a fan of bald men with funny accents. What do you think of Jason Statham in this movie?
I love Jason Statham all the time. I've actually, like, as we're reviewing his filmography right now, I've actually realized I've actually seen a lot of his movies, and I'm actually a big fan of like Crank and all that stuff. I like high octane, adrenaline rush movies. I'm kind of like very tomboyish. I don't think I ever lost that since I was a child. So I really like these kind of things, like guy things, as people call it. I mean, Death Race was a thrill, you know, like it was great to see Jason Statham, but you also saw a lot of people like, there was Tyrese Gibson, and obviously, you got the main kind of villain, bad guy of this was our bad lady, Joan Allen, who I think did a really great job. At the point that I've seen this, I actually haven't seen Joan Allen in many things.
Yeah.
So I think eventually now I've seen a little bit more, but this is still one of the roles that I remember her the most in, because it was one of the first roles that I saw her in. I mean, people are probably going to hate me. They're going to be like, oh, there's like 1,000 other roles that she did better, but it's usually the first role that kind of sticks out the best.
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason she took the role in the first place, I mean, she was Anderson's first choice to play the female warden, and he didn't think she was going to take it up, but she wanted to shake up her image from the films she'd been doing at the time. So she was really sort of keen to sign up and play this female warden, and it's a great role that she obviously is playing here, because she has all this sort of power, and she uses that to create this sort of threatening force in the film. She doesn't have to be physically aggressive like everyone else in the film is, because she essentially holds all the power. She holds all the cards. She chooses who gets to win and lose the death race, essentially, because I mean, we're obviously in this vision of the death race world. Society has basically collapsed. So the corporations have taken over the prison system, and in doing so, they can basically run them how they want. So they all started out doing gladiatorial combat between inmates, and obviously the audiences get bored, so they started creating new events. And one of those, of course, being the Death Race tournaments, which they now stream live for thousands upon thousands of fans who tune in to watch these races. And the top racer is a racer called Frankenstein, who wears this metal mask, and at the start of the film we see get blown up. He gets essentially double-crossed, and Jason Statham's character is, first of all, he's framed for the murder of his wife, and he's brought into Terminal Island, where these races take place, and he's given the option of taking on the mantle of Frankenstein, and all he has to do is essentially win one race and he will win his freedom. And he enters into this world where few people know that he's obviously playing this fake Frankenstein, but all the other sort of rival races still think he's this Frankenstein guy. So he's right from the start entered into this complete beef with the other favorite called Machine Gun Joe, who is basically got this whole aura of being gay around him because he uses male co-pilots where everyone else has to use female co-pilots because, sex sells. So they import all these female prisoners to be co-pilots. And I have to say that it's just very blatant sort of an attempt to sex the film up a bit because these co-pilots serve no purpose whatsoever apart from saying what's directly in front.
Yeah. Which, technically if you have eyes, you can see it, right? But they do have this, this thing of navigating it, and it adds this extra layer of kind of we finally get this whole image of Hennessy, which is Joan Allen. And the things she's doing under the table as we realize that everybody wants out pretty much. And this is the selfish world that they're in. And while it seems like you're teaming up and you have to do all this, there are things they need to do that isn't so simple, that, obviously it's not so easy to win that last race. And we saw as the audience already that everything went wrong. Pretty much shit at the fan, and it was not great. That led to the blow up of the last Frankenstein. And it's just I think the funniest part going into this is that this movie was made in 2008, and it's funny that the storyline is not really that much propelled forward. Where everything starts, the economy collapses in 2012, and when we look at it now, it's 2018, and we don't have a terminal island, and we don't have that sort of thing. It's this bleak outlook on the immediate future, right? We're 10 years down the road from where this movie is, and it's just crazy to imagine if that world had actually happened, what would be the case, right?
Oh, I don't know. Trump's got a little bit longer to get us there, so don't be surprised. I'm just going to say, don't be surprised if we start seeing death races in the near future. The way this is how we're going to make America great again, by holding motorized death races. This is obviously a near future sort of alternate timeline, and I love the fact that we open up in the steelworks where Jason Statham's characters work in Jensen Ames, and I have to say, for a steelworks that's going out of business, they seem pretty busy. Which obviously made no sense. And obviously, when the workers are all very unhappy about it, so we see them, Jason Statham's character, right from the start, we can see he can handle himself because he's there beating up riot cops, and you can tell the British influence of Anderson here because the riot cops turn up and they're beating the shields, which is a very British riot cop move. American riot cops don't traditionally beat their shields. It's only when you see British riot dispersal that are police tend to beat their shields. It's a very Zulu style tactic. We tend to use these for some intimidation, but it was nice to obviously see those the British influences in there. And I have to say that Anton is once again showing his fanboy self, because when we see Frankenstein at the beginning, he's voiced by David Carradine, who played the Frankenstein in the original Death Race from 1975. So it's nice that he obviously has these little nods, even though he's essentially rebooting it. He still sees this as being a prequel. So in his world, that we start off on Terminal Island, and then we have to evolve the races again. So we take it out onto the streets and run people over. That's what the evolution of the death races is going to be. It should also be noted that this is a Christmas movie. So if you want some alternate Christmas viewing, you can class this because it is set at Christmas.
That is true. I actually didn't remember that. Those little details. You're talking about the setting and where it starts, and I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm it's one thing that we really like Paul Anderson for, because I feel like even with a setting like Death Race, which is, in concept, a very simple premise,
Yeah.
It's just about prisoners that have to race in this online event that, to get out of prison pretty much for these crazily, they just have heavy sentences. Just from how he starts, because he doesn't have to start from how like Jason Statham was at the steelworks and all that stuff. But I think that by doing that, just instead of just having like the words of the economy collapse and stuff in the beginning, it really gives you an image of the world that has changed in America, like how it has changed the economy, and just setting the stage for just pretty much how messed up this future dystopia in America is. And I feel that like while it's not necessary that he necessarily essential that he does it, I like the fact that he set that stage up so that we have a better understanding of this world that has evolved.
I think this has always been the thing whenever we've looked at any of Anderson's filmography. They've always been worlds which follow very simple sort of set rules, and he's very good at keeping to his rules. And it's when we get into the death races, it's all very sort of laid out, and it's great the fact we get an infograph. So we're watching it as a viewer of the death races, and it's sort of like each racer has to win 5 races, and it takes place over 3 days, and these are the racers who are taking part, and it's all sort of like flash cuts, and it's all very sort of sharp. And at this point, he's actually calmed down his editing enough to allow us to focus on an image rather than just like going, oh, look at this and this and this and this and this, like we saw in like the last Resident Evil movie, where it seems that every cut can only last about 2 seconds before he has to look at something else. Here, he actually takes time to do focus and give us those wonderful central shots that he's so renowned for. I think the only thing that he tones down is his love of endless corridors, which I think here is just sort of boiled down to a bridge, which is the only bridge
and a tunnel. You know, that under that tunnel that they had to go through was kind of like a long corridor, and then they had the long bridge, and he really does tone it down. But I mean, like this one, I think the most effective part was it's just shot so nice because of, the whole like the God's eye view that he's really good at, and just really taking in that island, and the race course, and just seeing it from above. And as it pans around, you see where all the soldiers are, and you see just the whole like where Joan Allen is looking at everybody, and just that sort of thing. And I really love the idea of how he like kind of gives us so much information with just panning his camera and stuff.
Another character I want to just quickly touch upon is Jason Clarke's sort of second in command, the prison guard, Mr. Urich. And certainly something I noticed on this watch through is that there's a real homoerotic undertone, and certainly a tone to him, because he seems to take a very hands-on approach to when Ames comes into prison. I mean, he's there, he's lighting him up, he's hosing him down, he's sort of like takes this very strong interest in seeing him naked and humiliating him, which I really got this sort of real homosexual vibe from his character. And he's constantly got this sort of fascination to him that he shows in none of the other prisoners in there. But any sort of opportunity to see Ames nude, he seems to constantly be there. So, and it's surprising they didn't really do more with him, because I mean he's obviously seen as the second in command for Hennessy. And yeah, all he seems to do is basically follow her around and do a bit of general beating up of Ames.
Yeah, some dirty work,
And it surprised me they didn't really do more. They didn't have him like come in as a driver or something else like that. And that he's basically just there to shadow Hennessy around the whole film. I thought it would just felt like a missed opportunity with his character. But certainly it felt like there was certainly a homosexual sort of undertone. And certainly when we look at Machine Gun Joe, many of the other prisoners claim that he's gay. That's why he has to have male co-pilots. While it's never obviously confirmed, it does also seem in many ways, when we look at how Machine Gun Joe talks to his co-pilots, how he treats them, the fact that they had to make a male, because it would become very uncomfortable if he was doing these same actions to a female co-pilot like the other drivers have. Because he's like constantly humiliating him. He beats one up at one point. He certainly kicks another out of the car while it's moving. So it's a lot of violence against men. We as the audience, find it to the stomach. But if it was to a woman, it would, for a female character, it wouldn't be acceptable. And it made me wonder why they gave him such that brutal edge. Because yeah, I mean, he's a sociopath, but at the same time, he just seems to be like constantly pushing him, so he's like not the sort of character that you would see Ames as ever wanting to ally himself with, even though he's clearly the other top racer on the track.
I don't know. I mean, there's this aspect of Death Race that while I love this film, I love watching it. I mean, I think that's something I gotta say at first. No matter like how I feel about it, certain aspects of it, like I don't know, Machine Gun Joe is kind of this character which I think it was to be kind of a contrast to Jason Statham's character, because Jason Statham is kind of like, he's not really a criminal. He was framed and he was put in there, and he wants to be a better person. And he always talks about, how he wanted, his wife saw him as more, so he wanted to be more. And he's always doing that. And you can see from when he enters into his first race that he really was just doing what he needed to do. But he never was like very violent until he realized that, he was being double-crossed and they were kind of messing with him and they were bringing out this monster that they wanted to bring out a monster in him. That, he really kind of gets into the more brutal side of him. And I feel that that's kind of like the evolution of his character. Just like Machine Gun Joe, you kind of see him as this really, it's kind of like, I don't know if he was really, the concept was that he was homosexual. I would think it was just the fact that he was, people say that because of the drivers, but then it's because he was so brutal. But was it really necessary for his character to be that way? I think it's just because it's like a typical role, because you kind of have different characters here and they all have their kind of like, how do you say it? Like they have this kind of like stereotypical jail kind of feeling to them.
Yeah.
Whether it's like the 14K played by Robin Shaw, or you have like Pachenko, which it has a kind of a deeper history with Jensen Ames, which is Jason Statham's character. Everybody has this attitude, and they're kind of like different backgrounds as well. So they have a different way of carrying themselves as a criminal and a badass kind of like character. So I feel like that's why they set Machine Gun Joe like that. Is he actually homosexual? I think it's not. I think it's just the fact that he's so brutal. And, you see these guys at the end when they have to change the drivers after he kicks one out. They're like, no, I don't want to go. No, don't choose me. Like, it's a completely different from the women, where the women, they want to be doing this because they want to get out. Whereas these guys are like, I don't care if I get out. I just want to be alive, because there's like almost an 80% chance that they're not going to make it out of this alive. And it's just, I think it's kind of like this funny element. It adds this kind of like dark humor to it, because you start realizing through the course of the film that these guys, no matter how close they are to kind of getting out, they always end up dead. They always have the bad luck and end up like shielding this Machine Gun Joe,
I mean, the other reason I bring it up is that while we have at the end, it looks like he's going to escape with his driver is going to survive, but then his driver, his sort of co-driver pilot, gets machine gun death, and he has like an almost sad expression, like someone who's lost someone very close to them. And it just, as I said, it just made me wonder, was this that you get the feeling that there was some sort of deeper connection he hoped to this particular co-pilot that he had to the others, just the expression he has when he looks over at them being like riddled.
I didn't really get that. That's the thing, is I didn't really get that. I actually found it kind of like in a comedic way, because the way I remembered it was that his co-pilot gets shot during the final moments, right?
Yeah.
And he kind of looks over and he's kind of like, whoa, what just happened? And then he starts like touching himself to make sure like that he didn't get shot. And then it's kind of like a relief that goes over his face, where it's just like, whoa, that just happened. None of that got me, but it got this dude,
Yeah. I mean, certainly something you were talking about when we talk about the race, the different personalities that we have, because it's a real colourful bunch, and I think that's part of the charm of this Death Race movie, and something that was certainly lost when we get into the sequels, which we'll touch on a bit later. But this film very much follows into the fact that you have good convicts and bad convicts. And all the people on Jason Statham's side, they're in crimes of like crimes of like passion, or they're like they've been framed. So like Jason Statheam's character, he's been framed. His co-pilot Chase, she had an abusive cop as her husband who she killed, and that's why she's in prison. Liss is in prison because he killed his mother, who we can guess from his personality was abusive to him. So like a real Norman Bates style situation going on there. We've got Ian McShane as coach, who is actually a free man, but he can't cope in the outside world. And everything's gone to pot. He's stays on and works on the death races. And then we compare it to obviously the rival racers, and we look at like Pachenko, who's like an Aryan Brotherhood leader. We've got Robert Lasado as Hector Grimm, who's aka the Grim Reaper, who sees Hennessy as the avatar of the Hindu goddess of death, which is just, I mean, it's Lasado basically doing what Lasado does, and that's just basically to be the scary criminal element. Robin Shaw, here unrecognizable without his feathered hair. He's bald. And it was only when I looked it up after the first time I watched it, it was like, oh my god, that's Robin Shaw from Mortal Kombat. It's good that he's still getting work. And he's awesome as 14K. I mean, he's a triad. Because, of course, you can't have any sort of Asian criminal without them being a triad, same as you can't have a Japanese criminal without them being Yakuza. It seems to always be the rules you have to follow. But they at least give him some depth. I mean, his father sent him to business school, so he has a degree from MIT, and yet he's still in prison. So that really worked out for him. And then
but I mean, before we keep on going with those characters, I have to say, like, part of me when I was watching this again, I was like, man, does like Anderson, I wonder if he had like love for video games, because like when he's introducing these like characters in like the even like as they're going through the prison and they're talking about these different characters and these different racers, like they have this moment where you have the racer standing right next to the car. It's very where it's kind of like they just pan over this character, and then there's like the name that pops up, and you see like they're leaning against a cool ride. And I don't know, I'm getting like real flashbacks, like I'm choosing like a racer from. It's very entertaining. I don't know. I find like the way he shot this is so. I feel that Anderson is kind of underappreciated also, because he really has this stylistic approach that people never get to experience because they see him as like the crappy Resident Evil franchise guy, And I find that such a shame.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a video game vibe there. It's like you say, it's like you're playing Twisted Metal or Vigilante 8. It's like one of those sort of like vehicular shoot 'em up style games, because when these characters are introduced, they are essentially just like video game archetypes. It's sort of like, oh, you can be the crazy Russian, or you can be the ex NASCAR driver, and they've all got these. Some of the drivers get a little more developed than others. It gives you enough to work with, so you get the idea and on the track, and it makes them a little less disposable, even though some of these characters are sort of wiped out pretty darn quick. Certainly when we get into the actual race elements, I mean, this is what we're all basically here for. It's so you can see why Roger Corman was so keen to work with Anderson on this film, because I mean, main reason that he brought Anderson to the project was that he saw shopping and saw how he handled the car sequences in shopping, and that you can see it again when we look at these sequences, the way the cars roll, the way these cars drive, and certainly the stunt work involved here is very reminiscent to obviously what we saw way back in that debut film. And it's great the fact he's able to recall that eye for doing car stunt work in particular, and it's the fact that it's all practical effects for the most part. I mean, there's splotches of CGI here and there. It just gives it so much more presence than if they were doing this like with CGI cars or whatnot. So, and again, this all falls down to just his eye to detail here, because all the cars he's using are all like feel sort of like powerful, heavy, muscular cars. There's no sort of like dainty little racing cars. This isn't like Fast and Furious. These are all like big, brutish cars that all got like very offensive weapons on. I mean,
they're like a lot of them are very American. They're all like they all look like American muscle car. Like Machine Gun Joe drives like something that's very like Ford F-150, kind of like a pickup truck, and and like I think I think what's Jason Statham is driving another like very muscle car. It's very reminiscent of, I don't know. I mean, I don't know cars. We
He's
have to
trying to
call a
dodge
gamer
Challenger.
Sun Gamer to talk about this. I don't know this stuff. Uh,
Yeah, he's driving a Dodge Challenger. I mean, I'm such a nerd for this bloody film. When I was playing when you played GTA 5 online, I actually built his car from Death Race, and for the best part of a year, I just spent the time with my character dressed as Frankenstein. This movie just going around because I just thought it was the coolest thing. But yeah, I mean, these guys, they're all like arms to the teeth. I mean, they went through like 4 tons of blank ammunition filming this, and when you see the slow mo shots of the shells like raining down and just the sound design in particular,
yeah,
it's it's fantastic. I mean, if you're gonna fire
yeah,
hundreds, thousands, and thousands of rounds off, then show me on screen, and that's certainly what it delivers here. Um,
yeah. I mean, the sound design, the soundtrack, like just like the music they choose for it is just so suitable for this film itself. And it's one thing that really stands out for it also.
yeah, obviously with the car action here, I mean, we obviously have the changeover in pace because we're no longer running people over for points. We're on the track, and they have to run over different bumpers to activate weapons and shields and spike traps on the track, which is really cool sort of idea, and it keeps everything sort of fairly on the level. At the same time, Hennessy, apparently to spice things up, introduces her own racer, which is basically a huge truck called the Leviathan, which I think is up there. If we're talking about coolest movie vehicles of all time, the Leviathan is up there. It's not only the most cheaty vehicle of all time because it's got like a tank cannon and like more guns than anyone else has, and basically easily eliminates half the racing field. Um, but it's so damn cool to see that truck on the.
Yeah, it has everything on it. It has like cannons and it's just ridiculous. Like you see this thing come out and they're just like, the people are like, what just happened? What is that? Like, and you can just see everyone's face is like they don't know what to do, and then I think that's what makes it so cool that, it's as big as this truck is, they're able to kind of like cheat the system a little and kind of like, obviously we're nearing the end of this right now, so we might be heading into some spoilers, so let's get into the spoiler alert right now. Where like they do the unexpected, and he teams up with Machine Gun Joe for the first time despite their rivalry to kind of survive out of this, because you don't get out of prison without surviving the race. So I mean, they team up, and you just see this beast explode when they activate that death head plate, and it's just quite the scene to watch, I find.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was watching again. I can't tell if that's like a real truck that flipped or what's going on here. But I mean, they flipped this truck before Dark Knight. Now everyone raves on about the truck flip from Dark Knight, but this film actually flipped a truck before Dark Knight. I mean, we could obviously go back even further and look at Battle Truck, which flipped a truck back in the 70s. But yeah, this is so cool, and the fact it's shot in slow motion, I can't tell if this is like a real truck or if it's a
Yeah.
CGI truck. But certainly it's like almost a voyeuristic camera angle that he's like shoots
Yeah.
this the carnage of this truck like essentially disintegrating as it comes to a sudden stop. But yeah, it's I love the way that Leviathan. From the first race, it's like into the background. It's like, oh, what are they building back there? Because you see
Yeah.
it's all behind the curtain, and then suddenly like what was behind the curtain is now missing, and it's like, oh guys, and then suddenly it's like big truck comes thundering out, and it's bringing back memories of like Mad Max 2's finale, because obviously that used a big truck, and it works perfectly because they're not slowing down. Everything's going full pelt here, and it's shown as being like this dominating force just in how it's eliminating races left, right, and obviously 14K's driver gets one of the worst deaths because she gets spiked, and he gets a pretty cool death as well, which I won't ruin. But yeah, I think the Leviathan's like one of the absolute highlights of this, because you think, I'm on the level of what we're going to see here, and then it just comes out of nowhere. So like, oh, I just throw in a big truck.
Yeah.
And I think it, as I said, it's just genius, and it works so well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, another thing about, I think one of the things as I rewatch this is that Death Race is kind of like a lot of racing movies that we see nowadays. It's kind of like a little bit, it has that over the top aspect, which is kind of like Anderson's thing. He kind of has that over the top feeling for
Yeah.
some of his movies. Um, it's kind of a style and it works really well for him. But you know, here is like, you have this kind of like, I guess it's a little bit of suspension of belief where, you know, where we don't understand why the steel mill is so in full is so busy when they're about to close. It's the same thing where, you know, you have that ending part where Ulrich goes to like plant this thing in the car when Hennessy is making her hot air speech, you know, where she's just spouting this random thing. Everybody's like, what the hell is she talking about? Where is she getting to, you know? And then in the background, you see this thing going in and you're just like, and then you watch the scene that they're not even going out to race right away. And you're just kind of like, okay, well, that's really weird.
Oh yeah, it's certainly got its flaws. I mean, why do people smoke next to the palm tanks?
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell?
Yeah,
But I mean,
like
it plays to its strengths.
yeah, exactly. But I think that, you know, for people who appreciate movies like this, it's that's why we always say this is Anderson is very stylistic, but he also is kind of like he has his own market, in that sense where you have to really appreciate this kind of movie, especially with Death Race or like Mortal Kombat or something like that, right? It's something a little bit, there's like kind of a little bit cheeky or there's a little bit over the top, some suspension of belief, that sort of thing. And racing films have that. And I think that this one also has that kind of feeling where there are things that don't make sense, but because of the entertainment level and the exciting feeling you have and just like the fast-paced, high-octane adrenaline thing, a lot of it you don't really think that much about, and you can kind of dismiss it because, you know, it is the future, and you know, we don't really have like only a few of the characters really go really in depth. But you know, I mean, I'm just putting it out there as in like, you know, there are some flaws with the narrative itself and like the flow of events, but it doesn't stop me from loving like how this film comes together.
Yeah, there's so many aspects. I mean, it plays to it. It knows when to play to its strength. It's like, what do we want Jason Statham to do? We want him to say funny one-liners in a Cockney accent and punch people. Yes, he does that. We get to see Ian McShane just every scene. Ian McShane's in is just brilliant. He doesn't have a bad line in this whole thing. Even if he's spouting off like a corny one-liner, like "that's entertainment" or "nobody messes with my car," it somehow works for him, and I think he really sort of is the element that's obviously missing. Because I mean, obviously, when we get into the sequels, which went direct to DVD, his character is essentially replaced by Danny Trejo, which isn't bad. But I think Ian McShane said he set a different level here, and I think you can understand his character's motivation, and it just really sort of works as a sort of mentor character to Ames's character. There's just, as I said, there's just all the bits of this film just somehow just come together and they just work really well. But yeah, as I said, I'm just a big old nerd for this movie. I just love it so much. I mean, I've seen it so many times and it's still fun. So
yeah, no. I mean, I'm I mean, anybody who frequents the Tranquil Dream site knows that I'm a big fan of racing films. I'm like Fast and the Furious all the way. I love films like that. I mean, I even like Need for Speed, and everybody hated that film. I mean, I like a lot of these films. I like, especially like Jason Statham. You know, we're gonna go into recommendations very soon, I suppose, for like what films we pair with this one, and you're definitely gonna see some of those things coming up.
yeah, definitely don't watch Death Race 2. Okay, Death Race 2. I mean, our lead is replaced by the woeful Luke Goss. Luke Goss has done two good performances in Hellboy 2 and Blade 2. And both of those were Del Toro, which really bodes well for season 2. But Luke Goss constantly has this face of someone who's like crop dusting and trying to hide it. He's just like constantly tries to do that Jason Statham. He's like a poor man's Jason Statham. Every time I see him on the screen, he's just so awful. And unfortunately, we get him for two of these bloody Death Race movies. Death Race 3 Inferno isn't bad, But Death Race 2 is just awful, awful, awful. Avoid it like the plague. Even though Paul W.S, who seems real devotion to franchises, did actually do the script, and he produced that one. Evidently, he didn't feel that direct-to-video was the market he wanted to do for a sequel, so he kind of left that one alone. So, and went back to his Resident Evil films. So,
yeah, well, Resident Evil is done now, so we're I mean, I think that Resident Evil boded a lot better than the next two films we'll be talking about anyways. Is how I feel about it.
it's sort of like it's like I can go and hang out with my hot wife, or I can hang out with Luke Goss. Oh, what a choice that is. So, further viewing, what would you like to pair with Death Race? I mean, there's certainly a wide field of films that
Yeah.
work with Death Race, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we mentioned a lot of it during it. I mean, I definitely say something like Fast and the Furious is a good one to go for if you're into like kind of like a over the top racing sort of thing. Maybe some of the later titles, not some of the first ones. Those, but then, maybe like something like, I don't know, Fast and Furious 4 or 5 or something like that. And I mean, if you talk about like just high octane, Jason Statham, I mean, I think Crank is a really good one that kind of really hones into this kind of like one-liner, fast-paced story. There's not a whole lot of driving in it. I think there might be some. I can't remember.
Some.
Crank. Yeah, there is some. I mean, you don't get high octane without having some kind of driving to move. You can't just run all the time. I think that's where it is. I don't really know what to pair with it, but I think those two would be nice. Like something else that would be Jason Statham, which is very fast paced, and I think Crank really fits that bill.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, my first one would obviously be, say, to go back and watch like the 1975 Death Race 2000. It's, as I said, it's rather camp and stars an early appearance by Sylvester Stallone as Machine Gun Joe. It also features David Carradine and Frankenstein. All of the racers drive these very themed cars. So Machine Gun Joe has like actual like Tommy guns on the front of his car. Frankenstein's got like a real monster sort of car, and it's it's a fun time. I mean, it's you can certainly watch worse films out there. It's such as like Death Race 2 or anything with Luke Goss in it. But my choice, I mean, what I would actually pair it to if you wanted to obviously avoid the more obvious choices, like watching like the Mad Max movies, which I would say it's a very close comparison to. I mean, obviously he does very well from that George Miller playbook, but I would actually say to watch Redline from 2009, which is a science fiction auto racing anime produced by Madhouse, and basically it's similar plot to Death Race in the fact that you have these racers from around the world who are going across this interplanetary race across the galaxy. So it's all colorful characters, big cars, and lots of driving action. But it's a really stunningly animated film. It's directed by Takashi Kiyoke, and is one of those sort of more modern animes. It falls in the sort of same like Summer Wars and Mario Miracle and Yona Penguin. It's sort of very sort of different sort of anime film than what you expect. It's not all just so wide eyes and mecha and randomness. It's as I said, it's a real solid racing flick, and especially if you love colourful characters, this one's got it by the shed load. So that would be be my pick.
Awesome.
That was what brings us to the end to another edition of Movies and Tea. Thank you as always for listening. Kim, where are we going now? I mean, obviously we have 2 movies left, but what is next on the slate?
Next is we're heading to 2011's The Three Musketeers, which it's the Three Musketeers story. I don't know what else you want me to say about it. It has Matthew McFadden, obviously his wife is in it, Mila Jovovich, Luke Evans. I'm looking at the list right now. Logan Lerman. I haven't seen this before. Have you?
I've seen it once.
Okay. So
I mean, it's basically a steampunk reworking of the Alexander Dumas's classic novel, The Three Musketeers. Clearly, because obviously the Three Musketeers at this point have been done to death with the Oliver Reed version and the very underrated Charlie Sheen version. So Anson coming into the Three Musketeers property gives it a steampunk overworking, and we get to see old Legolas himself playing a villain, which is a fun turn of phrase. So it's certainly one of his more overlooked ones, but we'll obviously find out whether that's with good cause or not when we obviously look at the next episode. But in the meantime, if you do want to follow us, you can do it on Facebook or Twitter. We are also got our blog, which you can listen not only to all the episodes in our archive, but you can also check out fun bits of writing on this season's chosen director, Paul W.S. Anderson. You can find that at moviesandteapodcast.wordpress.com. And you also please do like or hit the subscribe button if you listen to us on Podomatic or iTunes or Stitcher or basically anywhere good podcasts are found at this point. We are there. It all helps us, especially if any sort of reviews that you want to leave us. It all helps us get a little more notice, a little more up the rankings. So thank you, of course, for listening, and thank you, of course, to my co-host, Miss Kimlo.
thanks everyone for listening to this, and obviously thank you. It's always
And
fun.
we will be back next time looking at The Three Musketeers.